Well, welcome, Steve. It's so great to have you.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Well, we would love to hear a little bit about the journey that led you to where you are today. And if there was some kind of defining moment that put you on this path.
Yeah, my story is a little crazy. I was a pastor when I nearly died by suicide. That is sort of where everything began for me. It nearly killed me. I was a victim of childhood sexual abuse and I was addicted, and yet all of that, including suicide, wasn't the end of my story. It was actually the suicide attempt it's where my life began. So the last 6 years have been all about honesty and vulnerability and recovering my life and learning what self-care means and boundaries and silencing the inner critic and creating a support system and learning how to create and cultivate a faith that works for me personally, and giving myself permission to not go with the status quo all the time and to stop hiding who I really am. And, it has been a difficult journey at times, and it has been beautiful. Self-discovery it's what a gift. And healing is it's such a wonderful thing. Healing is yucky and gross, and it's not always beautiful, and maybe it doesn't look like we see in the movies. There's a lot of work involved there, but boy, life every day on the other side of that thing, life has been such a gift.
Well, what was the defining moment that had you choose life as opposed to not?
Well, when you fail a suicide attempt, Maggie, you just kind of well, here we are. Hey, pal, if you didn't feel like a screw up before, don't get a suicide attempt right. I promise you will really feel like a failure. So I'm laying there in a hospital bed in an ICU room, and I have a choice. I can lay here and get up eventually and go to the psych ward and get better and find healing and tell the truth and ask for help. Or I can suffer through this and get out of here as soon as I can and go do this again and get it right the next time. Get it right. Isn't that a terrible way to talk about a
Yes,
suicide attempt?
horrible.
But that's where I was at. Those are
Mhm.
your
Right.
choices. And I remember laying there, I was numb from the waist down for 3 days, couldn't feel my legs. The doctors are trying to figure out if my liver is going to make it. My wife is there, her best friend is there, and everyone's trying to put together pieces of how did we get here? How did this happen?
Hmm.
And I'm looking out the window and I'm numb. I'm cold. I don't want to be there. No, honey, I didn't mess up my meds. I tried to die. I don't want to be here. I'm miserable. I'm unhappy. I don't feel like I can live up. I feel like I'm not good enough, and shame is just eating me alive from the inside out. And I I think what changed things for me is I'm lying there in the deepest, darkest moment of my life, other than 24 hours before when I had tried to die. I'm in that bed, and I hear this inaudible voice whisper, "I'm not finished with you yet." And to have some kind of an encounter with the divine in the darkest night of my soul, for God to meet me there and basically say, "There's a better way. I'd like to show you a better way if you're open to that. It doesn't have to be this way." To sort of folks who are familiar with the biblical story of the prodigal son, for God to come and meet you in the pig pen, in the mud, and say, "Come on home. Come on back. Let's do this right this time. I'm not giving up on you. Your life isn't over. You are not just the sum of all the mistakes you've ever made. There is so much more to life. It absolutely changed my life.
But at the time, weren't you a pastor and doing well in your community and being of service, and people were engaged with you? I mean, you're very engaging, you're very personable. Weren't you in a place where you were successfully doing life?
Yes and no.
Or at
I
least on the
looked
outside, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
looked great from the outside. That's the thing about mental health, and it's the thing about the stigma around mental health. So, people who hear my story, the biggest disservice that I do them is to say, boy, the last 6 years have been a lot of hard work and I'm better. Things are all good. That's not true. When you live with a diagnosed mental illness, when you fight the black dog of depression, as we call it, when you have PTSD and flashbacks from childhood sexual abuse and all these terrible things, there are days that it's still difficult. And so, but I didn't know any of that at the time. All I knew is in the world I grew up in this very conservative Christian, evangelical buckle of the Bible Belt in central Alabama, you had two choices. You could be Christian or you could be crazy, and you couldn't be both. You couldn't, if you couldn't take a magic Jesus pill and suddenly your life is all good and health and wealth and happiness and everything's great, if you couldn't do that, there was a problem with you. And so I didn't know that I had permission to go to counseling. Nobody ever talked about meditation. We didn't talk about things like self-care. It was faith. It was all about faith. It was all about praying a prayer of faith and miracles happening, and you having some miraculous healing. And that's the world I grew up in.
Right.
But there was no practical help. There was no permission to say, I am not okay. I need help. And so I had prescription meds from my doctor, and I would put them in my lunchbox, and I would go in the bathroom at the church, and I would lock the stall door behind me, and I would take my medication in the stall in the bathroom because I didn't want anybody to have any idea that I needed help for my mental health. And so that worked for a little while. I'm a very outgoing guy. I know how to work the crowd. I know how to entertain. I know how to educate. I can do all of that. I can be your biggest fan, your greatest cheerleader. I can make you feel great. And so I did do all of that. And from the outside, I'm leading worship and I'm teaching Bible studies. I'm doing all the things, and I'm dying on the inside because I don't know that I have permission to ask for help, to say there's more going on under the surface than just what you see outside with this smiling face.
So even your wife was not aware?
She was certainly aware that I was on medication, that I was dealing with major anxiety, that I was having nightmares and flashbacks. She knew that. She did not know that I wanted to die. She did not know the times that I'd be driving down the interstate and think I could just drive this thing into that overpass and people would think it was a mistake. No one would have thought Steve Austin would have tried to kill himself. No one. And so there's stigma around mental health, period. But when you are in faith communities, especially in the more traditional Christian world where people just don't have the education that they need, I think it's even worse.
Yeah. Where it's God or nothing.
Yeah.
And don't reach out. You got this, and God has you.
Yeah. Yeah. And our
With
very narrow box of God, our brand of God, there's no supplementing. There's no anything else. It's our way or the highway. It's tough.
So what kinds of things did you put into your life to reawaken and to just transform yourself? What tangible ways?
Yeah. Once I was transferred from ICU to the psych ward, I stayed on the psych ward for a week. And for about the first 3 years, I would look back on that time in the psych ward and think, what a waste. What a joke. Here we are adults, all of us at the end of our rope, or many of us at the end of our rope, really messed up. And we're doing things like making sure we get 8 hours of sleep, and we're taking a nap, and we're eating 3 meals, and we're having a snack, and we're sitting around and talking about our feelings. And if we're happy, sad, mad, or glad, like, what is this? This insurance is paying for this? Are you kidding? We're cutting words out of magazines and gluing it on paper to try to talk about how we feel. This is like glorified vacation Bible school. What, it's arts and crafts. What are we doing? And it took me 3 or 4 years to realize they were teaching us the basics of self-care. They were giving us permission to be weak sometimes. They were saying, yeah, your emotions matter. Your emotions are great messengers if you listen to them and aren't controlled by them. And you should tell people when you're hurting, and you should tell people when you're happy, sad, mad, and glad, and you should get good sleep, and you should eat well. You should do all of these basic things. So it started there, doing these very basic things. As soon as I got home, my wife chose to stay with me, against all sorts of advice. People said, "Man, he's a lost cause. He's lost it. You should leave and take your 1-year-old baby and go live with your parents and ditch him." And she refused to do that. She believed in this guy she knew me to be underneath all the pain and shame and secret keeping. And so we started marriage counseling, and I started individual therapy, and got my medications regulated, and cut way back on so much unnecessary busyness. I was a pastor. I was working a full-time job in a school system. I was running a photography business on the weekends. I had a radio show. I was so incredibly busy, but I didn't have to be doing all those things. I was just hustling for my worthiness. I was addicted to approval. And if you tell me I'm good enough because of these things I'm doing, maybe eventually I'll believe it, and maybe it'll be true. And I had to pull away from all of that stuff. Some of that stuff I didn't have a choice. The church is likely not going to hire you back. They're likely not going to keep you on board when you're in mental health crisis. And so I had to pull away from all those things and find my worth inside, and find out who I was at my core. And so that's what these last 5 or 6 years have been, is learning that mistakes are great teachers, and so is suffering, and that I don't have to have it all figured out all the time, and that God lives in the gray areas and in mystery, and that it's who I am that counts, not what I do. That my worth is not found in job titles or projects or the next book, but that if I don't know that I am the beloved at the core of who I am, there's nothing I can do that will make that feel any different.
Well, it's interesting because I think a lot of us live in this misperception of reality that anything and everything that we need to be happy and fulfilled is somewhere out there.
Yeah, I
That
can go get it somewhere.
Yeah, if I just have that degree or that wife
Yeah.
or that car or that job, I'm going to be fine. And then most of us wake up and realize once we have that, we're not happy.
Yeah.
Then we're in search of the next thing.
Yeah.
And and I mean, everything we need is inside. It's
That's
all
right.
there. And every
That's right.
answer to every question is already inside. But
Yeah.
it is in the busyness that clouds over that.
Oh, it is. Yeah.
When we can't connect to that silence in between all that internal chatter and that internal dialogue, we fail to see the beauty of God or just whoever that is for you.
Yeah.
And be able to hear that in the silence.
That's right. I have been reading about the reticular activator. You want to nerd out for a minute? The reticular activator. I've never heard of this before in my life. And I'm talking to my boss, who is a dear friend of mine, and she's been a mentor for about 10 years. And she said, "What do you know about the reticular activator?" I don't know anything about what? A reticular what? And so in a nutshell, it's this piece of your brain that filters out all the unnecessary stuff. Or the opposite side of that coin, it's the piece of your brain that notices things. So you don't notice all the little red convertibles on the road until you go by that little red convertible. And suddenly, oh my gosh, look at all these little red convertibles. And it's the reticular activator that's doing that. And so I think about how stillness has completely transformed my life. Stillness is my prayer time now. Where used to, for me, the way I was raised, prayer was this sort of heavenly to-do list that you would give to God. Hey, God, I'd like for you to do this, and God's sort of your do boy. If you could take care of all those things, that'd be great. Amen. And now my prayer time is going inward rather than trying to find it out there somewhere. And stillness it's the reticular activator of my soul. It's the thing that filters out all the busyness, all the unnecessary, all the white noise, and says, hey, I'm going to help you get still. I'm going to help you get down below the level of quiet, and I'm going to help you start noticing things. I'm going to help you start listening to the needs that you have and the answers that you have, and let you start finding those things inside of you as you regularly have this stillness practice. So that's one of the things that's absolutely changed my life.
That's great. I teach meditation and mindfulness, and one of the things in Sanskrit, they call that place between all that internal dialogue, Atman Darshan. And what that means, literally translated, is glimpsing the soul.
Mm.
So that space between one thought and another thought is your ability and your access to glimpsing your own soul.
Love it.
Isn't that beautiful?
Yeah.
It is beautiful. Yeah. And every religious tradition, every culture has some kind of a way to return to stillness. Like even the Bible says, be still and know that I'm God.
Absolutely.
And then every, Gregorian chants are a form of silencing. All of the things, chanting the Torah, prayer, of course. It doesn't matter which religious, cultural tradition you come from. The stillness is, where we get to bump into our own soul.
That's right.
Yeah. So what philosophy do you live by now? I mean, what is guiding your life now?
Yeah. You know what? For a while, because of church hurts and spiritual abuse and just toxic religious environments that I was raised in, I stepped away from it all for a while and just said, you know what? I don't know that I buy any of it. And if the way these people that I see living, if that's what it means to be a Christian, I don't want to be one. And it was a real grieving process, and I went through a lot of anger. And now I'm on the other side of that, and I've come back to Jesus. Jesus is still at the center of my life, but I think today it's the real Jesus, at least as I see him. It is not the Jesus that we necessarily hear preached on Sunday mornings, but it's this message of unconditional love, that underdogs are welcome, that everyone is welcome, that there's space at the table for everyone, that life is really messy and can be painful, and life is suffering, but that grace is messy, and that you belong exactly as you are, that God, Brennan Manning says, God loves you as you are. And I think that's it, that we don't have to get cleaned up or have it all figured out, that it's not all about having the right theology or dogma or doctrine or belief system, but finding that apart from, or maybe with all of that, if that works for you, but that deeper than all of that, at the core of your being, I am the beloved of God, and there's nothing that I have to do to earn that, and there's nothing I can do to change that. And sort of like we were talking about earlier, instead of looking out here and up there, and God is up there and I am down here and we are separate, I find God on the inside, and I'm learning so much about God from so many other traditions and so many other people. I think about when I sort of think about this all that is God, I think about a puzzle. So we have this puzzle table at work, and they do these 1,000-piece puzzles. And I'm not a big puzzle guy, but my coworkers during breaks will sit down and they work together and they build these 1,000-piece puzzles during their breaks over the course of a couple of weeks. And you have a 1,000-piece puzzle, all these pieces are out on the table. I can't really tell what that is, but as we start getting 100 pieces together and 200 and 500, it really starts coming together and you start seeing this beautiful picture. And for me, that's a lot of what spirituality is. If it's just me, I can't really see a whole lot of God, but I put your piece with mine and this person and that person. We start, joining together. It's sort of, Rob Bell is one of my heroes, and Rob Bell talks about it as a prism with 70,000 faces, and we keep turning it. We're looking at the same thing, and it's as we connect, it's as we see that we are not separate. It's as we see that in our unity, there's so much room for diversity. It's changing me, and it's allowing me to see God so much more clearly. So I think it's celebrating the beauty of humanity more than maybe even any specific faith tradition or religion. It's just that, boy, we are human before we're anything else. And as a result of that, we should celebrate one another. We should listen to one another. We should respect one another. We should practice kindness before we practice this sense of self-rightness. And I
I
think
think,
love can really change the world.
and I think one of the other misperceptions of reality is that we are separate. And
Yeah.
until we start to understand that I am you and
Yeah.
you are me,
Yeah.
there's no tolerance. There's no
You got it.
ability to find compassion and tolerance for one another. And I believe that's the basis of warfare
Hmm.
and what's going on in the American society today, and
Absolutely.
how it's I'm right and you're not. And there has to be some kind of division until we come together and understand that we're all the same. Then it's going to be difficult to find
Yeah,
peace.
that's right.
Yeah. So what little bit or monumental tidbit of wisdom would you like to share with us today and leave us with?
Oh man. Um, I'll tell you one. I'll tell you a favorite lesson of mine from my granddad. So my granddad just died back in February, and if there's anyone who has influenced my life more than really anyone else, it would be him. And he taught me lots of things. He taught me to be my own man, and he taught me that faith is personal, and he taught me a lot of things. But one of my favorite lessons from my granddad is to saucer and blow it. So in our family, coffee is this just perfectly acceptable drink from the time you can walk. If you can walk, you can have coffee. And they drink coffee at my grandparents' house all day long from from dawn till dusk. Um, and I can remember there being times growing up. I don't know if this happens at anybody else's house, but at my grandparents' house, you've got the saucer, you've got the cup. The cup is sitting there in the saucer. And if you're just dying for that first drink of coffee of the day, but it's so hot that you just can't do it yet, then it's absolutely fine to hold the saucer in one hand, take the mug in the other, and pour some of that coffee out into that saucer and blow on it, right? So you blow on the coffee, that little thin layer of coffee, and you allow it to cool down, and you just slurp it down. And so it's saucer and blow it. And so this lesson, this great memory, this weird, peculiar thing that my family does if you just can't wait for that coffee, it's translated into my life. And I think through lessons that I've learned, whether it was giving up a college scholarship to pursue ministry, or breaking up with my first fiance, or becoming an interpreter, or starting a photography business, or recovering from a suicide attempt like we've talked about today, anytime that I have faced a really difficult decision and I'm stressed out and I'm not sure which way to go, I would call my granddad and he would say, "Stevie, it sounds like you need to saucer and blow it. It sounds like you need to give it time. let it cool down, let the dust settle. Don't rush through hard times. Don't rush through big decisions. Don't rush through suffering and miss
Mhm.
the lessons that these things have to offer you. So, saucer and blow it.
Oh, that's beautiful. I love that.
Yeah.
I really am a firm believer in just allowing yourself to dwell in the difficulty
Hmm.
because that's where the lesson is.
Oh, yeah.
If
Yeah.
life was perfect, none of us would grow. And
That's right.
also, you touched on it earlier, very, very beginning of our talk was you talked a little bit about vulnerability. I think it's key. Unless
Mhm.
we allow ourselves to be vulnerable, it's very difficult to really get that whole idea that I am you and you are me.
Mm.
Until I
Yeah.
can relate to your suffering or your difficulty, I can't realize that I'm just as human as you are.
That's right. Yeah, it is. I shared a blog several weeks ago now on my site about the one difference in secret keepers and storytellers. So I think the one difference, because I lived for 28, 29 years as a secret keeper, scared to death for anybody to know who I really was underneath all that performing. And the one difference now, looking back after 6 years of lots of therapy and lots of honesty. I think the one difference in being a secret keeper or being a storyteller is finding the courage to own your story. Tell your truth. You don't want to be a secret keeper anymore. They're eating you alive. They're eroding your insides like battery acid. Tell somebody. If you can't tell your mom or your partner, hire a professional. Go see a counselor. Go to confession. Do what you got to do, but get that thing out of you so that you own your story and it doesn't own you anymore.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Exactly. I mean, you learned it a very difficult way,
Yeah.
right? And I agree with you about the conversation about mental illness and the stigma around it. And it would be so wonderful if our society was more tolerant of people, anybody who's different,
Yep.
different in whatever capacity, whether it's
Absolutely.
mental illness or skin color or speech impediment or whatever it is.
Yep.
But then again, that goes back to that whole idea that, if you can't understand that I am you and you are me,
Hmm.
it's difficult to find
It is.
tolerance and
It
compassion.
I think it goes back even larger than that. I think it's a conversation about fear. It's a conversation about fear and love. My friend Ed Bacon wrote this wonderful book, 8 Habits of Love. And it's all about you have this choice if you can live in the house of fear or you can live in the house of love. And I think our number one problem today in our culture, especially Western American culture, is that we're afraid. I'm afraid of anyone that doesn't look like me, dress like me, vote like me, pray like me, have sex like me. I'm afraid of anyone who's different from me so much that I'll put up a wall to keep them out. I'll lock them in jail. I'll shoot them down. We see this fear leads to violence so
Hmm.
much. I think it's a huge trigger for all the violence that we see today.
No, I agree. I agree.
Yeah,
And it's also what
heartbreaking.
kept you from sharing your own hurt, right?
You better
And
believe it.
what keeps most of us from sharing ourselves is the
Hmm.
fear of being judged or criticized or what have you, not being
Yeah,
accepted for whatever reason that
that's
is.
right.
Yeah. Oh, it's been an absolute pleasure to be with you today, Steve.
Oh, same, Maggie. Thank you so much.
And where can we learn more about you or some of our listeners be able to get in touch with you?
Yeah, the easiest way to connect with me is by going to my website, which is iamsteveaustin.com. I have a new book coming out in October. They can find out all about that there at the website. You can find all my social media links, follow my blog. I have a podcast of my own, the Ask Steve Austin podcast, and the links to all of those projects are there at iamsteveaustin.com.
Well, tell me a little bit about your book before we let you go.
Sure. Yeah, I would love to. So it's come out this fall. Looks like late October. Not totally certain on the date yet, but looks like late October. And the book is called Catching Your Breath, The Sacred Journey from Chaos to Calm. So it is a book that is all about, in the midst of chaos, slowing down, finding calm, learning how to experience new levels of freedom and strength and healing and energy. It comes from this idea that I don't think you have to have an official mental health diagnosis to have a meltdown, to feel completely overwhelmed by a culture that says just fake it to make it, just keep going, just keep pushing. I think that we are, like so much of what we've said today, we are consumed with fear and pain and anger and anxiety. And if we don't deal with those things, if we don't tell the truth about what's going on inside of us, we'll implode. And that's certainly what happened to me. So this book is about 50% personal narrative and memoir, and the other 50% is my perspective as a life coach. It's practical, actionable tips on how to move from chaos to calm. It's all about giving you permission and then giving you the tools to come up for air and learn how to breathe again.
Oh, it sounds great. I can't wait to get a copy.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, Steve, thank you so much for your wisdom and for your time. It's been a delight to have you today.
Well, I have loved it. Thank you for the opportunity.
Well, and we look forward to having you on again after your book comes out.
Great. You let me know. I'll be back anytime.
All right. Thanks so much.
Thank you.